As we explained yesterday, this has usually been a very, very, very fraught session. The RMCs and the DSPs. As I recall, in Edinburgh, there was blood on the carpet. It was virtually a fist fight. And let's face it, no conference wants their major sponsors in intensive care, if not on life support. So the next year we thought, well, we'll stage manage that. We'll have it very, very nice. And of course, you felt that because you're authentic people. And when things are fake, you know it. Yeah, that was stage managed. So having had the blood on the carpet, having had the stage managed, the third year we decided that we'd really fluff it up and sidestep it entirely and talk about conscious capitalism, which didn't go down at all well either. So this is our fourth attempt, the power of challenge. And this time, we have attacked this issue systematically and scientifically. We have convened a forum. And before we even start, I really want a round of applause. I'm just going to read out the names of this forum because they have given so generously of their time here. You can save your applause for the end. Abby Flanagan of Paragon, Fiona Redford of Carter's, Simon Scott of Santa Fe, Dan Danko isn't here, but nonetheless he gave of his time from Grable, Adrien Sregiti of BGRS, Sylvie Schmidt-Verbruggen of ERS Luxembourg, Christine Martin of Olympic Advisors Barcelona, Madalena Micheli of Professional Organizers Milan, Åsa, our former president of Gunsten of Nordic Relocation Sweden, Guntram Maschmeyer of Dwellworks Germany, Louise Howe, Spencer Howe, UK. These people have given so generously of their time already to make this thing happen. So a round of applause, please, for our panelists. So the idea was that we would bring together in a forum representative samples we would say, of, shall we say, both sides of the equation, although I don't like both sides of the equation, because really this forum is about working in partnership on the basis of trust and communication. And if there are a few little, sardonic smiles in the audience, we're going to wipe those smiles away by the time we've finished. Because what they then did, this forum, under the aegis of somebody everybody trusts with their life, Åsa, hands up those who wouldn't trust Åsa with their lives. Yeah. No. Absolutely an honest broker whom everybody trusts under her aegis, because she chaired the panel. They came up with, clock this, okay? This is a very, very, very comprehensive survey. 41% of you bothered to answer this survey. Hands up who bothered to answer this survey. The key is in the bothered. Who actually answered it? Right. So in future, everybody, if you want your concerns, your objections, your whinges, your complaints to be heeded, you answer the survey, right? 41% of you answered this survey, an extremely comprehensive survey. And on the basis of that survey, and by the way, before you start asking where it is, you will be given this primary source material at the end of this conference. But there would be no way that you would file through all of this during the conference when you've got busy meeting schedules. You wouldn't read it. This is the primary source material. From this primary source material, the hard work, the heavy lifting has been done, because we nominated 4 rapporteurs, each of whom was going to deal with a very tricky subject, the salient subjects which emerged from this questionnaire, and they have taken it upon themselves to look at the very tricky issues, the difficult issues, and to answer them for you. So we're going to have 4 keynote presentations, 4, should I say, presentations, and then questions and answers. Now, it's true. There's one question that did come up and could take us at least an hour and a half to discuss this afternoon, if not longer, and that was the issue of price RFPs. But we are going to, in fact, devote 30 minutes to that. Simon, will be reporting on that. He has taken the trickiest issues, the constant complaints that have come up in this questionnaire, and taken it upon his extraordinarily broad shoulders to deal with these issues. We're then going to have Abby, who's going to talk about implementation. Fiona will then be talking about the benefits of working with RMCs, and Adri is going to be talking about the added value both to DSPs and RMCs of working in partnership on the basis of cooperation and trust. That is the methodology that has been adopted. I assure you now that on the basis of what they learn from this and what you learn from this, we will then go back, they will go back into another forum, discuss what the learnings are, come up with suggestions. These people are so generous with their time, they have even said that if there are further comments, complaints, whinges that you would like ventilated, please address them to a member of the forum. If you haven't got the guts to do it here, do it online afterwards, and they will be discussed in the relevant forum, and we will address them as a group in EuRA. It couldn't be simpler than that. One of the key learnings emerging from the forum was that people were staggered how little RMCs knew about the daily grind of DSPs and how little DSPs knew about the daily grind of RMCs. Truly, that issue of communication and lack of knowledge about how the pressures that everybody's under, different pressures from different sources, and I believe that once we get some of those issues out of the way in this overall forum, many of your questions will be answered. So, without further ado, Simon, 30 minutes without hesitation, repetition, or deviation, you have the floor.
Thank you. Right, so the first thing we wanted to look at was RFPs. And one of the interesting things that came out of the survey material was there is a lot of things that we potentially kind of thought everybody knew. And what it turned out is that actually there's an awful lot that people don't know. So what we did was went through all of the questions that people asked, and we've grouped them into themes, and we're going to bring out some of those questions and give some answers. So for those of you who don't know, for the last 6 years, I've been responsible for the tender pricing team within Santa Fe. We've been doing something in the region of 400 odd tenders a year. So I've got pretty good at it, versed in all, and seen just about every type of tender you can imagine. So with no further ado, let's move on to some of the questions. So the first theme that we looked into was how RFPs are set up. And within this, we got a question which is, so can't they be done in an easier and less time-consuming way? Can't a standard be established and used by all RMCs? So this brings up one really interesting point, which is that I hate to tell you this, but we don't write them. The people that write them are the customers. They send them to us, and we have to take them. Now, we do challenge. You know, some of the things that come through, we do challenge those. But ultimately, if the customer wants us to respond to their requests in the way that they've asked us, we kind of have to do it. And so when you get these tenders and you look at them and think, this makes no sense to me, chances are we're probably also having the same thoughts. As I often say, if you consider a company's spend, everything they spend money on, and you took that list of everything they spend money on and you ranked it, unfortunately, the amount of money they spend on what we deliver is way down the bottom of the list. And therefore, if that company has a procurement function, chances are the person that's going to be looking after that tender is probably the most junior, the most inexperienced person in that procurement team. They're going to be young, they're going to be ambitious, they're going to want to make their mark, and they're probably not necessarily going to approach it in a way that somebody more experienced would. So they might go to their mobility function and say, tell me what you'd really like. And the mobility person may come up with this amazing idea of what they might want to buy. Now, that doesn't mean to say we can actually deliver it, but that they didn't ask what should we be buying. They said, what would you like? And the two don't necessarily always marry. So that's why we sometimes get tenders where they're asking for things which we just look at and think, well, you're crazy. Then this can't be delivered. I was talking to somebody just yesterday, and it's like buying cultural training, but saying, well, I'd like it in 30-minute pieces over the space of 6 weeks and it has to be face to face. You know, it's just not going to happen. But somebody might like that. So that's one of the key points is we don't write them. Unfortunately, you know, it's the clients that write them. I think all of the RMCs do their best to try and work with clients to give them ideas about how they might want to structure tenders, and the ones that are on the ball, you know, they listen to what we have to say, and they try and ensure that they are, you know, using our ideas to ensure that they're putting tenders out in a format and with a requirement that we can all respond to. Because actually there's no vested interest for anybody if we're forced to respond to tenders which are just really difficult. So we try and do our best, but ultimately, you know, the client is king, and if they want to put out a difficult tender, then there's not much we can do about that. We have to kind of respond to it. So this kind of neatly goes on to the next question, which is, are you trying to sell realistic service packages? One day house hunting in most markets does not work. Couldn't agree with you more. The reality is that we don't want to see that either. I especially don't want to see half-day house hunters or unaccompanied virtual versions of. You know, it's you know, I think we understand as well the challenges that come from doing you know, these difficult to deliver services. And again, unfortunately, it's the client that's putting them in the tender. They're looking for you know, more cost-effective solutions. They're looking for things to be done in a manner which they think is going to be cheaper, is going to be quicker. They sometimes don't necessarily think about whether it's going to get the right result. And again, you know, well, quite often through a tender process, the one thing that generally always happens is they'll give you, as part of the first stage, they'll give you an opportunity to ask questions. And I think pretty much I'll be very surprised if all of us didn't ask questions. And you know, if you see something like this where they're asking for a service which is very difficult to deliver and give an effective solution to the client, you'll ask the question. You say, well, you know, do you think this is a reasonable thing to be requesting? Have you considered da-da-da-da? The client can choose to respond to that or not, but we do challenge, and we try to ensure that ultimately what we need to ensure we can deliver is something that's going to give the assignee the value that they're looking for. Because actually, if we can do that challenge right at the beginning and we end up with something which is actually more reasonable, then it means we're far less likely to have problems down the line when we have an unhappy assignee because they didn't get what they wanted. And at that point, it's very hard for us to then point to the customer and say, well, it's their fault.
Simon, can I add?
Yeah.
Sorry, can I add in as well? Because it's also if the RFPs comes out to you guys, because we're not market experts in that particular country. So if you've got any questions and you don't think it's feasible as well, make sure you're coming back to us with it. Yeah?
Yeah, no, definitely. It is, and, you know, and that's part of the problem with tenders, that they tend to be a bit of a one-size-fits-all approach. But the reality is you all work in different locations with different realities, and therefore trying to blend that one-size-fits-all approach from a tender with the realities of what you have to deliver on the ground is very difficult. But ultimately, they're a tool by which these companies have to make a selection. So, you know, they're always going to be somewhat of a compromise. So that moves on to the next one, which is, what is the standard duration of an RFP and when the results will be communicated? So standard duration, I wish there was such a thing. The reality is that it can be anything. I've had some tenders which have been a week, and sometimes a week is doable, depends on the size of the tender. I had one tender came in a while back, and it's actually a very good example. So this was a tender for destination services in immigration, and it covered 430 locations. And they gave us 4 weeks, which sounds manageable, but for our 430 locations, that was quite... And of course, the immediate pushback was, well, hang on a minute, have you really moved people to 430 locations in the last 3 years? And their response was, well, no, but we might. So these are the kind of things that we have to deal with. When will the results be communicated? Well, that's a really good question. The unfortunate answer is sometimes they just aren't. Sometimes these things just disappear into the vacuum. we did one not too long ago, and the way that we knew that nothing had happened is because they sent us a new one. But it had just been complete static. You know, we send questions and oh yeah, we're working on it, da da da. But sometimes they just don't respond, and sometimes it's because things have changed internally. So new people have come in. There's been a complete change in the business, complete change the focus of where they're going to relocate people to, change in packages, all sorts of stuff. And I guess that reflects the fact that what you've got is you've got the procurement function who's doing the exercise, and then you've got the mobility function that's got other things going on as well. And the two don't always marry, so that causes a few challenges. So, you know, we try to do our best to communicate back to everybody to say what's happened. But I think the other reality is that we're dealing with a lot of tenders, so it's very easy to go from tender to tender to tender. And therefore, when you hear back in 3 months' time that you were successful, this didn't happen, or you were unsuccessful, by that point you've kind of forgotten about it because it was 3 months ago. So you know, and I talking from a Santa Fe perspective, I think there is we could do better, if I'm honest, and we probably do need to do better in terms of communicating those kind of things when we are successful or unsuccessful. So, you know, that's certainly a point that I will take on board. But yeah, it's a challenge. It is a challenge. So the next section was on available information for RFPs. So the first question there is, why is the name of the potential client not disclosed? It would be helpful to have this additional information. I completely agree. Unfortunately, we're quite often not allowed to tell anybody. So we're sworn to sign an NDA. We're not allowed to reveal the name of the client through the process. And it can be somewhat frustrating because actually we often know that if we were able to disclose the name of the client, many of you may have actually worked with that client and might have some really interesting information which would really help us. But we're not allowed to, and therefore we have to be bound by that. And again, the slightly frustrating thing is that a lot of the time, by the questions that are asked, by the way that the pricing structure is created, you probably guess anyway. But we're still not allowed to say. But it's like the worst, the worst kind of secret. But yeah, so that is a bit of a tricky situation. I guess one of the learnings when we discussed this was that probably what we need to do is actually tell you that we're not allowed to say. That's probably not a bad idea either. So we've certainly all discussed that and taken that on board. That you know, we probably need to declare that if that is the case, then we'll let you know. Why are the same questions coming over and over again? I feel your pain. It's basically because we have to respond to each tender individually. The reality is that I think all the RMCs would probably agree that you don't want it to become across as being mechanical. You know, that there's nothing more boring to read than a tender response, which is the same old material churned out time and time again. It's even more disheartening to write it that way. So we have a tender writing team, and there are always going to be certain facts and figures which are going to be the same things over and over again. But you try, you know, the tender writers that we have, they try to make it something that somebody will want to read. But there are the same questions over and over again. But what we try and do is we also want to draw upon your information. You know, the realities of your market. So the same questions will not be answered the same way by each one of you. You know, there will be local variations and themes that come from the way that you operate that will mean that answer is slightly different. So, but it is hard because you do feel like you're going over the same ground time and time again. But ultimately, we have to be able to deliver something that's a compelling argument as to why that client would want to work with us and to work with our supply chain. Is it possible to receive the number of authorizations per year? I wish. Unfortunately, we quite often don't know. What's even more unbelievable is that quite often the clients don't know, especially those clients that are perhaps globalizing their program for the first time. Part of the reason why they globalize the program is because they don't know what they're spending. They haven't got a clue how many assignees they're sending or where they're going or how much they're spending. And that's part of the reason why they look to the RMCs, because they want to pull all that information together, stick it into one place, and be able to learn exactly what they are doing. And then over time, we can obviously work with them to find ways to improve their program, maybe make some efficiencies, and that's the whole point. That's kind of why we're here. But it is a little bit frustrating when you're trying to make decisions around pricing or perhaps around resourcing when you haven't got a clue how many people you might be getting. So it is a challenge, but it's one of those things we kind of have to cope with, unfortunately. And the final one, if parts confidential, would be good to know that. That's definitely a feedback that we've taken on board, and I think we just need to be a bit more communicative in if there are bits that are confidential, we need to make sure we're telling you that. Okay.
May I ask you? When we're replying to RFPs, what I would love to have is that when we say we have the European Quality Seal, Global Quality Seal, that should mean that we don't have to send all the policies and all the documents that all the RMCs today know that we have, because that is a part of the Quality Seal.
Yeah. I guess the challenge is that so there's kind of an assumption that the client understands that's part of the challenge. So one of the most common questions, I guess, is a question around accreditations and that kind of thing. And it's very common, actually, in tenders for the clients to ask the question about who do you work with. So we'll often have a grid, and here's the list of the countries, and these are the partners that we work with in these locations. So you're generally quite transparent about that. Again, the best solution in terms of a tender response is to be able to talk about all the reasons why your supply chain network is absolutely amazing, and the accreditations and all that is definitely part of that. The only reason why we potentially don't always do that is because we're not given enough opportunity within the document to do that. And our RFPs come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. So some of the ones that are most difficult are the ones which are purely online, and you get like 250 words to do this. When you're trying to describe an entire business model in 250 words, it's quite a challenge. So it's always a compromise. Well, what do I leave in and what do I take out? So it is a challenge. I mean, I think there is I guess from a EuRA perspective, there is potentially an opportunity to, from an educational perspective, not just within these four walls, but then out into the wider community, into the corporate community as well. And I guess there's also incumbent upon RMCs to also have those conversations so the corporates get an understanding, and when they see the EuRA Global Quality Seal, they kind of understand what that means. So there's still some work to do in that kind of area. But it is a challenge that we have to kind of address.
I also have a small question, is that very often we do not only get one RFP, but we get several. So Monday morning, the first one, in the afternoon, the second one, the third one. Then even if you don't want to say confidentially the name of the customer, we find out by the countries that you mentioned or by the questions that you're asking. So wouldn't it be easier to at least trust us in a way or another, and eventually open a little bit the communication in order to work better with you and try to keep the customer if we're already working for you on that customer, or if eventually we have them indirect and that they go global tomorrow? You see what I mean? I think it's a partnership that we're working through globals, and I think you really need to think about this in future, that it might eventually, working together, might say saving the customer and keeping the customer.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the challenge for us is, of course, in terms of when we're in the tender process and we've got the name. If we're not allowed to share the name, we're not allowed to share the name, and we have to be really strict on that, because if we did, there is every chance we'll be kicked out of it, and that'll be it. We're done. Yeah. And then none of us win. So we have to be quite strict on that. But as you say, there's also that kind of thing that you kind of sometimes can work it out anyway. And then we have to have the conversation without mentioning any names. It's tricky, you know. You have to walk the line, and you can't step over it, but you know, you can walk it well. So you know, and I agree with you. That's where the partnership it really comes into its own. I think, you know, the ability to have that communication, that dialogue, and ultimately, if we are working more closely on these things, then we'll get the better result. I mean, that's ultimately what all of the RMCs are interested in. Is we want to win the business. So yeah, it's you know, we probably could do better in this, you know, in a lot of ways. But and I guess that's what we have to kind of work towards.
Any questions
Yes.
around here? Yeah.
Yeah, I just had one very practical question, and it's basically for all of you. What impact does the certification, the EuRA Global Quality Seal, has when you select a supplier?
So say I can take.
Okay.
So I think from BGR's perspective. Can you hear me? Yeah. Now, yes. Hi. So from BGR's perspective, the EuRA quality seal is really important. We understand fully, you know, that by you having completed that, you will have all the processes in place, you will have all the documents in place. And whilst, you know, during a client RFP, we might ask you to please send it to us. But by way of just, even if I don't work with you today, then I know that you have this seal, then you will have everything behind it. You will have those processes that I will be looking for when I'm selecting a supplier, if that makes sense.
Further questions here? Because in many ways, the panel here are your spokesmen and women, because a lot of the things that are bothering you, they too are bothered by. Any other further issues here, or we'll just continue on through the questions, and then I'm hoping to open the floor for a few questions before this particular phase of our panel discussion is over.
Okay.
Okay, Simon.
So next section is how decisions are made. So this kind of links on to what Christine was asking. Is quality of service ever considered or only price? Well, I can tell you it's not only price, at least in most cases. I mean, there's always going to be some exceptions. You know, there are certain clients out there that's their primary focus, and you know they might tell you it's other things, but they are going to be focused on price. So there are companies out there. But I think most corporate clients are going to be driven by looking at the selection process as a rounded one. They're looking to judge each of the respondents to a tender on a whole range of different factors. Now, how they weight those will obviously vary dependent on those individual companies and their feelings about, you know, which factors are important to them. From my personal experience, I can think of clients that, you know, have been very focused on kind of the right cultural fit. And, you know, we've just had a recent client that we've secured where they were so concerned about the cultural fit that we actually worked with our local DSP partner in helping that client get some comfort about working in that location for them was a new DSP partner. So it wasn't a Santa Fe location, and but it was a joint effort between ourselves and the DSP that we work with there. But cultural fit was really important to them. You know, that was one of their key drivers. For other clients, it can be, have we got any nice toys to play with? You know, some of them like, you know, some great technology solutions. So there's a whole array of reasons why. But I would say, you know, quality of service is always going to be a factor. Now, I think the challenge from a corporate standpoint is how do they judge quality of service in something that's a written document? And that's probably the hardest thing that they have to do. And some of them, you know, are very good at it by asking some really pointed questions. I think one of the other things we're seeing come through more often now is questions around specific scenarios. So they won't just ask the usual kind of stuff. They'll give you a scenario, and what they'll ask you to do is they'll ask you to talk about, so you got to price it, but then they'll ask you to talk about it. And this is where the partnership thing really comes to its own, because those locations where that scenario might be around could be any one of the other locations where you operate. And you know, we're not going to be able to answer that. We're going to need your help to be able to ensure that we get the very best response. And you know, we did an interesting exercise in the US, and we had one particular partner who I don't believe is here, who proceeded to say how in a certain location in the US, everybody went to the private schools because the local schools were terrible. Unfortunately, she didn't realize that the person sat in front of her went to a local school in that city. Bit of a snag. But you know, that's why it's really important to make sure we're working with the very best partners, because we need to draw upon your experience in those kind of situations. And I think those scenario kind of questions are going to become much more prevalent as time goes on, because it's a really good way of getting to the nub of the point. And quite often it replicates something that they actually did in real life. They might have had a particular problem. So when they're asking you about, can you explain why in this particular location, you know, or how would you deal with this particular problem? They're probably asking you that question because they had that same problem happen, and they had a problem. So so there's all sorts of flavors, but quality of service is really a tough.
Yeah.
Simon, just to keep everything in good order, because as we've explained, there is quite a lot of stuff that we want to get through, and I want to give you a bit of an opportunity for a Q&A. We've got about 5 more minutes on this session and quite a few more questions to go through. I'm hoping already that many of the issues that you would have brought up have been covered. I mean, the frustrations that are felt over here are clearly frustrations that you feel over there from the person who's tormenting you.
So I'm going to whiz through the rest of these and just pick out some of the really good ones.
Yeah.
So I think the second one here we've kind of probably already talked about in terms of with the communication about when it's won or lost. How does an RMC decide who gets the job if we know that our competitor has less people, does not have an office, has bad customer reviews, Okay, so the reality is sometimes we don't get a choice. Sometimes the client may come back to us and said, well, we actually have a preferred partner in this location. And we might sit there and go, really? Okay. But you know, sometimes that happens. So that you may look at that and go, well, that doesn't make sense to me. We also might be sitting there and go, it doesn't make sense to us either. But you don't know what that history is and how that's come about. So it's not always as clear cut as it might seem. And then this is the final one, which is it's kind of just another one, but it's something I thought was kind of interesting. So what's the criteria to choose a provider? Do they choose by price? What's the margin they have? They squeeze the DSPs, which ultimately may lead to fewer local providers. Is the goal from the RMCs to put small DSPs out of business? No. And actually, I can talk from Santa Fe standpoint here, because we actually do DSP in a lot of locations ourselves, and we definitely don't want to go out of business. Thank you very much. So, but we kind of feel the pain as well. So no, the goal is not to put DSPs out of business. When you're squeezed, we're being squeezed as well, and it comes down from the top. You know, the amount of tender processes tend to go on and on and on, and what you tend to find is that you'll put your price in the first round, and then they'll come back for a bit more, and then they'll come back for a bit more. So we get pushed a lot, and it makes it hard. But no, absolutely, we are not looking to put anybody out of business. You know, if you go out of business, we have a problem. So we kind of need you. So, you know, but we do our best to kind of push back as much as we possibly can. You know, you have to, eventually there comes a point where you have to draw a line and say no more. But sometimes that's quite tough. So the whole process is quite tricky. But yeah.
Simon, thank you for heroically managing to do that within your allotted half an hour. If we have time at the end. Now, I am hoping that a lot of the issues that were generated by this questionnaire have been covered here, and I think a lot of them is, communication and an understanding of what your job involves and what your job involves. A lot of that, it seems to be the issue. But if we could ask Abby now to report on implementation, if you're ready to roll, Abby.
Of course. So just to reiterate, I'm going to be giving sort of my feedback and comments and analysis based on the comments you made in the survey. But with the focus on implementation and partnership. So there is a slight crossover with Simon, really because the same theme is coming up. Ultimately, I think it is communication. And as we all know, communication, truly is king. But to really sort of respond to a comment made, which is in front of us all, inform about timelines and give feedback, please. Now, this is specific to the implementation question. We would love to be able to give a strict timeline. Unfortunately, it's a moving post. It just moves through no fault of our own, through no fault of anybody's, other than it could be that somebody's on holiday. It could be the number of departments that are involved within that client. It could be that some key sort of member of the team, the RFP team, has suddenly left that client, and therefore, do you know what? That implementation, although you've been awarded, is not going ahead anymore because somebody new stepped in and said, oh, no, do you know what? We're making no changes. We're sticking with what we've already got. Just to give you an indication on the number of departments involved from a client perspective, you could have mobility. Well, you will have mobility, hopefully. Procurement tends to be taking over nowadays. You will definitely have procurement. You will have finance. You will have legal. You will have IT. You will have data protection. You will have HR, just to name a few. Now, trying to get consensus from all those parties, if it's in one country, absolutely fine. You've then got to factor in that it's in multiple locations. If it's a decentralized client, then we could be here next year, 2 years' time. Even if it's a centralized client, it's still getting everybody in the same room and everybody on the same page. So it's a case of, it's not always the RMC sitting on that timeline. We're waiting for that information to come in. As soon as we have that information, we will sort of be straight out to let everybody know. We've also got to factor in that before we can start implementing, we need key documents signed, i.e. the contract. I've just recently had the pleasure of being told I'm taking over international implementation, so I'm going through this pain at the moment. And it really is due to the fact that key client members are on holiday. So we're ready to go. But they then sort of suddenly come from sort of left field and say, oh, actually, Abby, do you know what? We didn't discuss that, but we'd quite like to add that in. So then you're frantically going back to the contract thinking, have we got a clause that covers that, or do we need to quickly add it in, rather than go through the pain of an addendum in a few sort of months' time? So we definitely need the NDA. We definitely now need data privacy, and we need that contract signed. Before we have that in place, the general rule of thumb is we don't go live with that client. Now, we all know that that sometimes doesn't happen. And I can hold my hands up and say, we've already gone live with a client without a contract in place, simply due to circumstances. They had a group move, we've got to go. So we are then automatically playing catch up. And that's where sort of everybody in this room comes into play, because we're all sort of used to those scenarios. And, sort of from a personal perspective, I thank you for sort of jumping on board and helping, sort of all of us out in those particular circumstances. So the giving the feedback, yes, that's all back down to communication. And, sort of along with Simon's comment that, Santa Fe, yes, I think all of us, all the RMCs have taken that on board through the forum and through sort of conversations at conferences such as EuRA, that yes, we do need to give that feedback back. We're not being non-communicative for a reason. It's just, something that we have taken on board that we need to improve upon. Moving on, another comment was a detailed scope of works is a necessity. An introduction to the local HR works very well, but is seldom initiated. Detailed scope of works, absolutely. And if you're not getting that from the RMCs, then it's a case of ask, 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 demand, demand, demand. It's essential. I can't do my role if I don't sort of have a job description. We all deviate from it, slightly, but you've got to have that, especially as part of a new implementation. It's absolutely critical. You need an insight into the client. You need an insight into their culture. And although scopes of work tend to be standard or somewhat standard nowadays, there's always slight variations dependent on company culture, dependent on the location, dependent on the policy type, to name a few. Now, introduction to local HR, absolutely. It's best practice. However, it's not always possible we're under the sort of dictate of the client, so it could well be that the client has said no. They want to have central control of the relationship through the RMC. It could be that they're trying to centralize their program and remove their sort of local country HR sort of involvement. So we are sort of dictated to by the client. Wherever possible, we will always go with the local HR introduction because it's to everybody's benefit. That face-to-face contact, and just as a reminder, DSPs are literally the eyes and the ears and the extension of the RMC in that country. So it's absolutely imperative that, the relationships are built up at all levels. But the only sort of real reason that the local HR wouldn't be sort of introduced is from a client dictate perspective, not from an RMC's perspective. And then a time frame, expected volume and training would be good. And again, this touches somewhat on Simon's points, but from an implementation perspective, it could well be that we've gone live with a contract. We still don't know expected volume, believe it or not, because it's a decentralized program, the client is decentralized, and actually the person sort of in charge of the implementation and the RFP doesn't have all the full facts, and for whatever reason, cannot obtain them from their counterparts in the other locations. Training, absolutely essential as part of implementation. And again, if you're not being trained to your satisfaction or not receiving training at all, then ask, and demand. Because as part of the implementation, again, you need to have an understanding of the client's culture, any red flags, so that they can sort of be addressed immediately and upfront. Time frame, I think we've sort of all covered on. There are roadblocks, significant roadblocks, that unfortunately are quite often out with our control. Moving on, org chart of the RMC, decision levels and escalation sheet, absolutely. And it shouldn't be at point of implementation. It should be, sort of at every single level of your interaction with the RMC.
Abby, are you happy to take a question over here?
I just wanted to say that what is important for us is to feel that there is a reciprocity. We are, sometimes with, our business is not really to do RFPs. We have a business to run, and we are sometimes under time pressure. We understand that. But then what's very frustrating is maybe not to hear back, as simple as that. So I think an effort should be made on the side of whomever is asking us to participate in RFPs, and
Absolutely. No, I fully agree, and it's common courtesy.
Yeah.
Now, and it's not an excuse, but I will just sort of paint a picture, is it could well be that we've moved on to another RFP, and this is by no means an excuse. But what we've got to sort of factor in is the size of the team. For example, I have a team of 3 covering the globe and wearing multiple hats. It's not that I don't want to say thank you and give a feedback. It's just a time constraint, which is absolutely no excuse. And I promise to do better. But you've got to factor in that we're dealing with multiple countries and different service scopes. So we could be reaching out to, sort of 14 household goods providers, probably, 50 DSPs, 50 visa and immigration supplier partners, cross-cultural language, temp accommodation, et cetera.
Yep.
So, but we've taken it on board. We must do better.
Yeah, very good. I'm sorry that I can't always look at the DSPs, and if you do have questions, just shout, and we'll try and accommodate them within the 15-minute slot that each of these rapporteurs have.
I wanted to ask you something regarding the detailed scope of work, because sometimes, and we were discussing yesterday, for example, with Liz about that, scope of work is not that clear, especially when it is per day. So, for instance, if you ask us to quote an orientation day rather than a home search, we do know that the orientation, has a more limited preparation work. On the contrary, if you have a home search, there is a property preselection, and after that there will be the lease negotiation. In some countries we have a lease proposal before the negotiation, and then utilities hookup, etc. Sometimes these things are not that clear, so that if we find, quote, 3-day program, 5-day program, for example, the home search, should we consider 2 days for the home search, because 1 day will be for the property preselection? So out of 4 days, if you ask me to quote the home search, I will automatically quote or consider 2 days out of 4. You see what I mean? So there are services where the back office activity is quite huge, and so how should we consider? Is that only face-to-face, or within the 4 or 5 days we should consider also the hidden work, let's say?
From my perspective, that's so important as part of the implementation training, because that scope of work will have been documented and is in the contract. So it's almost sort of a bullet point to break down sort of whether it's a 2-day, 3-day, 4-day, 5-day program, and then anything out with that is an exception. So that information should be with you sort of in advance. And again, it's down to communication. Is it just ask? Is it so important to get the scope of service right? Because it sets the expectation with the assignee and the family. And we've all had scenarios where, it's sort of deviated and it dramatically goes downhill if expectations are not set. So to your point, it's got to be clearly outlined for everybody to understand. And if it's not clear, then it's back to the RMC to say, you need to define this more clearly, and we need to talk through some scenarios whereby an exception may be granted as a contingency plan. So it's back to that communication and that partnership of being able to pick up the phone and say, not quite sure about this one, we need to button it down.
Yep.
I'm just going to add one quick thing on that. So to a specific point about how do you consider a day, and I think to Abby's point, it's going to be in the contract. So some contracts will say the day represents face-to-face time, and everything else has got to be considered in the price, but it's not included in the day. Some you'll get will say, here's a 5-day program, and the 5 days covers everything. There are challenges in both approaches, but you could see either. But it's got to be in the contract, and the scope has got to be clear as to which of those kind of scenarios it covers.
Can we also eventually look for the future that we are more proactive as well, and that you are more proactive, or your teams, with messages like where are they staying upon arrival in temporary accommodation, to really make sure that you also communicate that to the DSPs or to the local consultants, because very often we're running behind the information, or we have to contact or ask the customer or the expat itself, which is not really a very nice image. There are things that we could really implement, and in the implementation also make checklists that make us better work and have a better communication between each other.
Good. Have you got many more to do, Abby?
No. Well, just really sort of in closing, the focus truly from, sort of is on partnership. As I've stated, but I'll reiterate, we cannot service our clients without you. You truly are the sort of our extension on the ground. You're our experts on the ground. One of the first things I did when I sort of fell into my role at Paragon and for those of you who know me know that I literally fell into it, it wasn't my first choice, was change the terminology, the internal terminology from vendors to supplier partners. Vendors, to my mind, is sort of, very harsh and derogatory, and so, but from all of us, it truly is a partnership. And if you're not getting what you need, then, again, come to one of us, but also go to your direct contact and say, can we just have an informal chat? Because we're all here for the same purpose. And, at the end of the day, our clients are, the most important to us. But at the end of the day, I also believe, you and my clients as well. So partnership and communication is key.
Thank you, Abby. And again, an awful lot of work done to distill all the messages that came out of this questionnaire into a very, very succinct report. Thank you very much for that, Abby. We're doing very well. We're sticking to our timetable. Here we go. Because I do want you guys to have the opportunity to put questions to, and our panel as well. Fiona, on the benefits of working with RMCs. Fiona.
Okay, so my subject, what do you see as the most positive aspect of working with RMCs? So I decided to start with the cons, actually, just to make it more interesting and hopefully then conclude on a positive note. So for the cons, so one of the comments that come up with some RMCs, more open communication and more accurate information would be nice. I think we've touched on that already, obviously, with Simon in regards to RFPs, Abby in regards to implementation. Everybody can do better with communication, I think. It's across the board. I've heard it since the session this week on Tuesday, right through with all the suppliers I've met up with as well. Definitely, no matter how good you do it, you can always be better at it as well. So that's in regards to RFPs and implementation. To Sylvie's point earlier, definitely communication, informative information to the DSPs prior to actually reaching out to the customers is imperative. It's actually, I'm really surprised that it's still happening because it definitely shouldn't be. Our operations team have all that information at hand. If they don't have, they should make sure they have it before actually placing the authorization with the DSPs as well. So it's making sure if you don't have it, then pick up the phone, speak to your IAC. They're the ones that have all the information, and making sure that you're well informed prior to reaching out to the customer. Another thing on being very communicative with is the volume, of course. We've touched on volume, obviously, with through RFPs. But a lot of the time, the client will come back and say to us, we have a group move whenever, and it's going to happen in Q2. They might bring that forward, and that's the kind of information, obviously, we need to take to you guys to make sure you have staffing in place, you can obviously deal with it, etc. But it could be it's also getting pushback as well. And I think sometimes, we get the feedback from the DSPs, why are you only telling us now? You're wanting us to roll this out in 2 weeks' time. It's because the client have dropped that bombshell on us as well. So as soon as we know, you'll definitely be made aware of it as well. So working with RMCs who don't know the first thing about my market, but who think they do. Actually, we don't know everything about your markets, because really that's why we have you guys. You are the shoes, feet, boots, whatever, on the ground. You guys are the market experts. You know everything about that. We rely on you for us to do our job as well. And as Abby pointed out, you're an extension of us. Yeah, you are part of the RMCs. You are that person, that expert on the ground. So no, we don't know everything, but that's why we're reaching out to you to provide that information to us. And again, it's not just about when we're asking for the information. It'd be great if everybody was proactive in feeding that back to us as well, whether it be, regulation changes in market and it's going to impact, it can have a tax impact. It could make the client think about changing from personal to private to corporate lease or vice versa. Anything like that at all, if you can feed that back to us as well. I mean, we're talking about communication here, and it seems to be we're not communicating with the DSPs. I think it goes both ways as well. So to make sure that you're feeding that kind of information back to us also.
Yeah, Ursula had a good point, yeah.
I'd just like to say that picking up the telephone. I mean, we're all using emails all the time, but quite frankly, use the phone because you can speak in a whole different tone and you get a lot across. And then you follow up with email, making sure that what you've talked about has been agreed. I can't stress enough, because our younger people in the office tend to like to use the modern technology that's there, but they forget that the phone, old-fashioned as it is great. It really is.
Thank you, Ajit, and I totally agree with you. We had the conversation last night just talking about emails, and I'll not say what my boss said about emails, but anyway, really, I think a lot of people hide behind emails, and you can spend a whole afternoon ping-pong emails, and then it'll be brought to my or whoever's attention, and if you just pick up the phone and have a 3-way call or a 4-way call, whatever it takes, it can get that issue resolved in half an hour. So, yeah, thanks for that, Ajit. The next one, it came up. We would really love to have more opportunities, or maybe the DSP can be tested before actually signing the contracts. So we were touching on it earlier from Simon with the RFPs. Some of the clients will actually ask to go on a mock tour prior to picking a DSP in that market. Now, personally, I think, yes, they should be paying for it as well. Some DSPs will maybe give it free of charge, entirely up to you. If you want to charge, more than happy to take that back to the client as well. But that's a great way for them to see exactly on the ground how you're going to deliver the service to that customer. And that's exactly what they're looking for. You need to treat them as you would if you were having an actual customer in that market. So yes, to that point, definitely, sometimes they come back and request that. The other one was RMC should really treat DSPs as their partners, and support should be given in every escalation or bad evaluation when it occurs. Definitely to Happy's point earlier, we do treat you, well, I'm hoping we all do, treat you as a partner. You're an external partner of ours. As I say, you're an extension of the RMCs. And I was actually surprised at that because, one, you'll see it when you get the survey as well, because the response back, we did go out to RMCs asking them how they feel about or how they treat their DSPs. And 78% of the people that responded came back and said, yes, they're partners. One of them came back, I think, and said, it depends on the DSPs and how they behave. But definitely, you're an external partner, and I think we all say the same thing. We've all agreed on that. If you don't feel that, please come back and let us know. Not today, but face-to-face, it would be great. And talking about escalations and bad evaluations, etc., another one I was quite surprised at, and I'm sure I'm speaking for all the RMCs here, because it's all about working together. We invest a lot of time, effort, to have the DSPs in our networks, and we're continually, in communication with them, training them, etc. And if, obviously, the ball gets dropped, we're working together to get it back on track, and I thought that was how everybody felt, so I was quite surprised to see that one as well. So again, please bring it back to our attention if you feel that's not the case. So that was the cons, unless somebody else.
I think Ulsa has a question here, yeah.
Is it working? Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
I would love
hand
to
up.
have once a year or so feedback from the RMCs as to how my team is working. How are we doing? We get the feedback from the evaluations that are from the signees, but I'd really like to have it from the team that we're working with. How are we doing? What could we do to do a better job together with you? And also maybe have the opportunity to give you that feedback as well. So it goes both ways. And in the ideal world, to really get better processes in place,
Well,
maybe,
there we
and there we are.
Also, do you think that what's emerging from this is just as when EuRA got going with the quality seal and let's have best practice and let's understand what best practice looks like, do you think there's space here for sort of best practice on how DSPs and RMCs should work together? I know it's an infinite sort of kaleidoscope of possibilities, but a few things like feedback every so often or whatever.
I think some of the RMCs are already trying to do this by having DSPs on board committees where you discuss these issues together. But I think what I see and what we're doing today is really trying to open up and to talk to each other across the borders. We're not seeing the RMCs as, well, competitors sitting here on both sides, but we're actually talking about things that could enhance the whole industry. And I think that's the important thing.
Yeah. Thanks, Ajit. To your, oh, sorry.
End of the day.
Yeah, totally. And to your point, EuRA, you're talking about, your team as well. And I think actually if there are, and I'm going to say issues here because we shouldn't just be speaking about, the negatives, it's the positives as well. So if there are any errors, negative evals, etc., one of the points of drilling down and, we go down to the root causes, sometimes we find it is the consultant that actually maybe wasn't doing her job right. And I'm presuming within the DSPs as well, you're actually tracking that, because I'm presuming you've got SLAs in place and everything, in place to manage your DSP or to manage your in-house consultants as well, to make sure that they are doing the job that they're expected to do. But great you pointed out, like from our perspective as well, like how our team are working together with you. And from some of my suppliers that I've met this week as well, that's one of the main points I brought up as well. What do you think about the dashboard calls? Is everything getting covered? It should be. Is it all relevant? Because we're all really busy people. It has to be, that hour has to be spent productively for everybody. So it's making sure that, as well as, is there anything else from a supply chain perspective we can do for you? So I'm hoping it is a two-way street. I think no matter what, we can get better at it. Everybody can. It's all a learning curve. And we can always improve. Sorry. Good.
And to your point, and I was going to add to that, is when we will touch on later on the value add that DSPs and RMCs do add to the equation. What I found very interesting is during our discussions, the term communication came up quite quickly, and we all agreed on communication and the benefits of it. And then at our second meeting, we came up with a two-way street, which I really liked, and it came up several times today. And the point that you just brought up, that I would like to stress is the two-way street, in my opinion at least, is not only for talking and picking up the phone, which is very vital, but also for listening. And to that point, and I think that got around our meetings, even though we started out with communication on a very top level, we kind of progressed to the fact that, the two-way street is actually also for listening and to see and to hear the voice of the other side. And we'll touch on that anyway later on.
Definitely. Thank you.
What about another 5 minutes? Is that good?
Yep. Okay. Very quickly, lovely pros. So volume of business, I think it goes without saying. Guaranteed income. On top of the guaranteed income, as long as the service levels are obviously what they should be. But on top of that, it's timely payment of invoicing as well, as long as the invoices are obviously submitted to us, as they should be. Quality improvement. I mean, as I said to you, we have the dashboard calls all the time. We're constantly working with you, retraining, etc. We're always looking to improve because you are us, you're our face-to-face on the ground. So we need to make sure that, we're together working on any improvements necessary. Breadth of service, this could involve not only DSP, but they could be looking for immigration as well from the same provider. Client marketing is already done, of course. Having a partner who works with you, which was great because it kind of contradicted what we saw in the cons as well. But I think the majority of you obviously felt that we were partnering. High standards drive everyone to continually improve the quality of their work and refine processes for mutual benefit. And process-driven, actually, you could see it maybe both ways, because I know sometimes you get suppliers coming back, oh my God, another process that we've got to go through, is there really a need for it? Yes, processes are in place for a reason. They actually help you manage your team as well. They make sure that everybody is doing the right thing. That's why we've got all the different quality of sales as well, because we are following these processes. So it might seem a hindrance, but it's actually a benefit.
Okay. Spot on the money there, Fiona. Thank you very much indeed. Now, our final rapporteur for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open the floor, is Adri on added value both for DSPs and RMCs.
Thank you, Francis. So value add was one of the topics that came up during our conversations in January, but it is actually a topic that you kind of hear this word floating around in this big air, and it seems to be a little bit overused or confused or misused even sometimes. So what we were kind of saying is that, the value add or added value, like, what does it mean? So what we kind of decided to do is to put a question into the questionnaire, which then I'm going to show you the results of. And then me and I had a nice chat with Guntram, actually, thank you for your help. And we put together, based on our experience and information that we have, some ideas so that we can define what value add truly is. So the first bit about the survey results, what I wanted to do is just show you what were the most commonly reported items, and also what were the majority of the comments. So what were the comments that came back a number of times that you have submitted, so the 41 respondents submitted. And it's quite interesting. I think a lot of people already know or understand or have a certain understanding about what value add truly is. And it's really nice to see that a lot of you are already reporting on savings on rent or the speediness around implementation. These things are really important and really do help the RMCs to be able to show the clients the added benefit of working with the destination service providers. With regards to the comments as well, we have seen the human relationships mentioned. I really quite like that one, actually, so I'm picking it out. But also, authorities or assignee experiences, response times, the knowledge of the local market. That's exactly what our DSPs are and why we're working together with you. So as we move on, these are the examples that we wanted to share with you of what really the added values are and how can DSPs add values. And then the last bits are going to be how can the RMCs add values as well, because we do. So one of the things, and this is obviously quite important, the cost savings other than service fees. So me personally, I have attended quite a number of client reviews, and when we sit down, we can see, and I think Simon mentioned it earlier, we can see that the actual cost of the destination service provider fees are in the bottom half of that spend list that the clients spend their money on. So what do they really spend their money on? They spend their money on rental fees, temporary accommodation, household goods, all of that. So you as the DSPs, you can help by showing cost savings, having stronger negotiation skills, writing them down, tracking it, and reporting it back. Because what we want to do with that is then go loud, shout about it. We want to tell our clients that we have saved you $1 million last year globally because of our DSPs negotiated a tiny bit of rent down. So as long as we can kind of work that together, it's obviously a mutual benefit. You're doing the hard work, but we're putting in our efforts as well to be really loud and tell clients of what you're doing. And that way, we can kind of take away the conversation around service fees, or at least minimize the conversation around service fees. Okay. The next point is about adapting to the different clients and their needs. And I think, this is really interesting because the way that the more I have worked with all the different clients and the more I understood our clients' cultures, I realized that whilst we're all providing, say, let's just remain in the DSP space, we're all, say, providing destination services, but those can be all different because of the client culture or the different client policies or what they require. So being able to be flexible, to be open to delivering the service a slightly bit of a different way. And all I mean is, for example, communication was mentioned obviously today. Pick up the phone, like Oza said, to the assignee, and say if it's a client, a telecommunication client, they will love if you just call them, because that's who they are. So if you try and get that understanding, and we want to be here for you to be able to discuss that and share this type of tips. But if you do that type of thing, then that will be, again, a stronger partnership and a stronger relationship established with the clients as well. just looking if there are any questions. No? The next one is the provide recommendations proactively. This is quite important. Now, obviously, lots of you, or maybe all of you even, are doing this on a day-to-day basis during the operations, during issues and escalations. And you come to us, you tell us what the problem is, and you tell us how we can resolve it. That is really, really important, and we all really appreciate that. There are certain other things that you can do or you can think about. So one of my most favorite examples recently, and this is when I'm saying this example twice in 2 days, but so one of our DSPs have come to us and with an analysis of our clients and the leases that they have had us sign the year before or the years before. And they told us, that, hey, look, you know, our environment has changed in our location, and now the rental fees have dropped. So if you help us get authorized for lease negotiation fees by the client, then we can save this much money for the client because we can negotiate those rental fees down until, you know, the end of the leases. I loved it, and I know that our client loved it, and they have approved it, and it's a win-win situation because you get paid for coming up with this recommendation. It's additional revenue stream for yourselves, but it also helps us show that, see, this is why you need to work with our supply chain because they are the ones who bring up these ideas so that we can share and work better together with you. Okay. This is my favorite one. So act as an advocate of the RMC. When we prepped yesterday, thank you very much for making that recommendation about it's important that I say that there is a clear difference between the services that RMCs provide to clients versus what you provide to the clients locally. So we are talking about global services. We are offering a number of other things. They come to us because they don't just want the DSP, but they want to have, say, obviously immigration, household goods, temp living, but also they would like us to help us with compensation, with centralized billing, with consulting, and those are the added things that the RMCs do. So when a client decides that they want to move away from the local basis and they want to come to a centralized global structure, then the best thing to do is obviously to work together or to realize that if I actually, as a DSP, say to this client, hey, you know, I know this RMC is really great, and I have worked with them for so long, if you need any information, let me know, and vice versa, then that creates a partnership, that creates the best results that we have ever seen from the perspective of being able to get and service those clients mutually together. Okay. I'm just running through because...
Oh, you're doing well, that's fine.
Right, so what do? We do a lot of things. We just realized that we're not loud enough about it, so we wanted to tell you, right? Because I'm sure it's not only us, it's all of the RMCs who are doing these things. This one is really quite interesting, and I know that we do at BGRS, and I'm sure that, you know, my RMC friends as well, promote you internally and externally. And this is when we have just talked about, like, what can you bring to us as added value? Those are the things that then we put into, say, a centralized SharePoint or intranet page that then client services can very easily access, for example. We bring those things that you bring to us, we take them to the clients. We discuss these items with the clients during the reviews, and we say that you know, this particular DSP has done this for us, and that's when they really start to understand that, again, our relationship has moved away from being transactional, and suddenly we are strategic partners, and we are able to really share these things with the clients. So this is why it's important that you know that we do this. We talk about you all the time. Trust me, every single day. and in a good way. We are always promoting our suppliers, and so it's great that you can actually realize that as well. The next couple of ones.
Can I
oh, sorry,
quickly?
yes.
I just wanted to add then, when we talked about these slides, and I saw first the slide to be an advocate of the RMC. So the initial DSP mind in myself kind of said, so I should be marketing you on your behalf. And then I kind of, when we talked and we talked about this, and I realized there's also a responsibility part, and it's coming back to the two-way part. There's also a responsibility part on the RMC side in this. Do you want to make your DSP an advocate? Do you want to treat your DSP in a way that he can be a solid advocate of your business on the ground, that we're actually performing on your behalf again? And so it to the second slide, which just came up with the promoting you, and I think those are connected then, because there's a responsibility connected to it as well, for both sides. We would definitely, as a DSP, be looking out to continue the partnership and to continue the business. Obviously, we're all in for the business, but also to continue the partnership to act as advocates on both sides of this communication line, so to speak.
Yeah, and thank you for, you're right, for linking these two, because I think, it is a two-way street, and we always want to be extremely open and transparent with suppliers, and we haven't been telling you these type of things before, so it's quite nice actually to get the chance to talk about what we do internally as well, but good point, thank you. So seeking efficiencies, and the one afterwards is best practices, I'm telling you now, because they kind of linked together. It's always seeking efficiencies is about the extra efforts that we go and put into our partnerships together. So when we're thinking about, say, where we are sitting, we can see different DSPs in different markets working for the same client, running into the same trouble. And so what then we do is that we go to the client and discuss that, hey, this particular issue is coming up, not related to each other. It's not about this one DSP, it's a trend that we see. So can we create a template, or can we create a checklist, or can we create, something that is a solution for this? And then we do that, and we share that with you, so that then you can just take it, and that way that particular trouble or issue has been addressed. And so everybody is obviously trying to resolve that issue on their local markets in their own ways, but if we can come to you with a resolution like that, then that will obviously save you time and save you the efforts of having to try and figure out how to do it. And obviously these will always have to be translated to your own markets, but what we're kind of talking about is us giving you templates or things like that. That's kind of the best idea, to make it so that we're working together more efficiently.
But this is also a win-win situation. For example, we had for one of the RMCs with a customer, we're educating, let's say, the RMC is to flag out and to escalate when, for example, the schooling situation, how many companies very often have late decisions on employees being sent over when the school's already fully booked. If we, let's say, already inform you those and those classes are up, please note that holidays are approaching, and you go back, we educate our customers, and by the end, it's again communication partnership to really go up to the level and to change a little bit their mind. The same with weekends, for example, when the brokers are closed and we can't do it. How many times do we really have to come back to you and say, it is not possible? Right. So there is a part of education, I think, today that we need to do with our customers.
Yeah, indeed. We have a few more minutes left on this, and I do want to open it to the floor. We've done extraordinarily well to get all this information across to you in such a short space of time.
Okay, so just quickly then two more points, and thank you, Sylvie, actually, that was interesting. So the sharing best practices, this is just tying back into the efficiencies. Sharing best practices is our main job. Like, that's why we are sitting here. That's why we are in supply chain, because we see the trends, we see the global markets. We are able to actually discuss different things with different suppliers, and therefore we are able to give you ideas on what can help you with something that we might have seen at a different place. So, for example, we have a DSP Excellence Committee who kindly agreed to sign up for helping us out in putting together training modules. And by way of doing that, we can then, in turn, share those training modules with everyone, and everyone can benefit from these modules. And these are obviously all based on best practices. You always have to translate that onto your local market and make it work, but at least the idea is there, and it is also based on a partnership together with a DSP Excellence Committee. So that's that example. And finally, this one actually ties back with where we started this whole session with Simon and what we do for the RFPs. I really don't think that I can overstate how much efforts and investment do all the RMCs put into selling and, well, actually trying to win a prospective client. We're all doing it because those clients have decided to come onto a global platform, and they want to try and find a single solution. So this way, what we're doing is, getting those clients into our area, our space, and in turn, we're able to turn that volume over to you. So, we really do appreciate everything that you do for us, including helping out with RFPs or helping out with issues or local knowledge base or market practices. These are all helpful and tying back to what then we end up doing. So I hope that this had to show you or give you some ideas of what you can consider as a value add. And that's, I think.
Thank you. Well, thank you. You see the amount of work that's been done to aggregate all the issues that have come from, also my understanding was it was 41% of EuRA responded to this. Was it 41 of them or 41%?
41%.
Yes. Which is a very good response. So that is an awful lot of information that has been aggregated, distilled, aggregated, and these sort of conclusions drawn by our entire panel and our rapporteurs. So a round of applause for that. Now, please.
But the thing is that this is the start. So if you think this was a good session, come on, bring on the questions, because this group is willing to take the difficult questions. If you've seen them today, they were not all easy. Some of them were kind of sensitive to some extent. So bring them on. We will try to look at them and reply to them.
So questions from the floor, please. We have about, and everybody's stuck religiously to time, so we might just run on a little bit, 10 to 15 minutes if necessary. Questions from the floor to our panelists.
Chris Winning, your hand was up first.
Name, rank and serial number, please.
Chris Winning from Corporate Care Relocation in Ireland. First of all, thank you so much to everybody here. It's been a wonderful session. Can I just explore the idea of partnership at that selling point? I find in 20 years of business now that there is a wonderful openness to selling together at that initial stage, and then if there's a win. So we may know a customer for a very long time in our market and they may go global, or it might be a very new company that you meet via your government agencies and they have a global partnership. It's a question we ask immediately when we meet somebody. And it's wonderful at that early stage, but then 2-3 years down the road, it's not always as easy to keep reminding the individual IACs or the people that you're working with that it's okay. We have a trust built up that we work with the local partner for their, we'll say, local new hires, because it's not part of the practice. And I'm very strong to say sitting beside Ben here, to say that, you know, things work out really, really well, but it takes a lot of work, doesn't it, to actually get everybody in all organizations to make sure that that initial hot flush of everybody doing work well together is translated down over the years, and that it's okay for the DSP not answer their phone if they're getting business themselves, and that you're immediately going to share that somebody has been in touch with you and check that it's okay, so that we can have genuinely mutual clients, and that it's okay for that to happen in a level of trust.
Would anybody like to pick this one up? Or is it just more a comment than a...
Yeah, I can just kind of respond to that from the perspective that we do on the selling perspective. Sometimes clients do ask us to, hey, you know, this particular country and that particular country, I want to meet your DSPs. And we then get the chance, and you have actually had us with something like that as well, Chris, where we get the chance to actually put our DSPs in front of our prospective clients. And then they make the decision based on that. So that's quite an interesting thing to do together. But also from the perspective of then what we need to do is obviously keep educating our organizations and our internal consultants, client services teams about what that relationship is about and how did we come to this relationship. So that's a very good point, and we do our best, and we will keep doing our best on the education bit.
And it's a key point because it's a win-win for absolutely everybody. But again, it goes back to that communication of, you know, and trust. And with sort of the partnership, that's where all those factors come into play. But absolutely, it's a win-win for everybody. And so, you know, it's a high priority for absolutely everybody.
And sorry, yeah, just to keep the relationship going as well, as I know like a lot of our suppliers come into our head office to do annual reviews, whatever. We always make it a point for them to meet up with the client services team, because that's the main point of contact, so obviously the IAC with the DSP, so to build on that relationship rather than just being on the other end of the phone. So face-to-face meetings are imperative.
Thank you for that question, Chris. Further questions from the floor? Now, while you're all cranking up to conjugate, here am I keeping everybody religiously on time, thinking that there'd be an avalanche of questions from the floor. But the good thing is, I think, perhaps because we have had such full and frank forum discussions between yourselves, a lot of the issues that are probably in the bosoms of the Kirk down there have been asked by you and to them. So questions from the panel to one another now.
I'm just very curious to know about how are you preparing to attend the needs of your Millennium clients? And second part of the question, how are you also viewing your partnership with the new Millennium DSPs?
Ooh, who's dealing with the young people? Ooh.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, you're pretty close to it. Yeah, you'll do.
I'll buy you that. So I guess I was having this conversation earlier today. I think one of the things that's interesting in the industry is that it's become more sophisticated. The days of the long term and the short term, and that's it, has gone. And so the challenge, I guess, for our industry is evolving to deal with those complexities. And I think, you know, some of the responses to that will be to, you know, to take a look at the way we sell. So some of the very functional kind of approaches of a 1 day this, a 2 day that may not be appropriate in the future. We may have to look at different styles of service delivery, you know, potentially a blended approach with partially driven online and partially face-to-face. You know, we're going to have to start making some different kind of considerations about the way that we deliver service. It will mean adapting to those and looking at how we, as RMCs and also as DSPs, change our business models and our ways of working to be able to meet those different types of requirements. For me, the millennials type, you know, I mean, frankly, I hate the word millennials. It seems to be one of the most overused phrases they're going. But, you know, all these different types of individuals with their different requirements, whether they be the self-initiated expats or whether they be the lump sum individuals, you know, they've all got their requirements, and we're going to have to find different ways to tackle those. But, you know, I think it makes it very exciting, because I think this industry will change so much in the next 5 years. And it's really incumbent on all of us to come up with those ideas and look to see how we change.
It's an interesting point. Human needs don't change. Human requirements don't change. The way people access information, as I've seen at the Jewish Museum today, little children just prodding glass, and there's the answer, that changes. The technology changes and the access changes, and those are issues we'll probably be discussing tomorrow. Further questions from the floor, please. Any further questions from the panel? We are doing so well here at the front. 4 o'clock on the nail.
I'm probably going to speak more of a comment, but I'd say thank you for the contribution of all of you of taking the time, effort, and energy. And I'm sure some of those questions and the dialogue, perhaps not as easy always. But I think one fundamental element that we all need to embrace, that if we want a workable relationship we want to have as human beings in working together, you have to stay in communication. And if you choose to shut down for whatever upset and aren't in action and doing and being the person, the bigger person in some cases, you are going to have a broken relationship. And the couple of things that with our team that we've been working on, we recognize when an escalation happens, it's just a word with so many letters in it. It's the context and the lens that we take, whether it was on the RFPs, whether it's on the implementation, the process, the value add. They all have a context of something that's happened in our life before, that we put a perception on it. And we enter the room with some judgment, because we only know what's in our past. And one of the efforts that we've been taking as an organization, you know, all the words, if I took your comments, you know, it's trust. You have to have respect. You have to have integrity. There's care. Communication, if I went down and counted the number of times, I started writing ticks on the page. You know, dropping the assumption, drop our ego, embrace. We know there's rigor, discipline, and process is our foundation. And really, it's about generosity and love. Because if you care about the partnership, and I think every one of us in the room absolutely cares about every transferee that's moving one step forward, you have an opportunity to embrace, and hopefully we can leave some of the baggage in the train station and move forward on a much faster speed rail and how we work together. Because as I look at all of you, there were moments physically where every one of you, whether it's on an RMC side or whether it's on the DSP side, there was a moment of confrontation at some point that I could tell that it was uncomfortable in the conversation. But each of you chose to stay engaged in the conversation, to stay on forward thinking of that solution. So from my side, thank you. You've been a contribution to all of us, I hope, in the room. And it's about making a difference. So thank you.
What a wonderful note to end on. That is just a perfect note to end on, again, on your behalf, because, as I say, this has been the lightning conductor, and this work will continue. This extraordinary, heroic work will continue in this forum. People who give so generously of their time to come physically together, who created this extraordinary piece of work, who distilled the quintessence of it, who answered the ugly questions, reported on it with complete honesty and transparency. And they have again pledged, I reiterate their pledge unto you, that if there are any issues at any stage, you feed them to them, and it will be discussed in forum, and there will be some resolution to this or some discussion of it. And again, as we're talking about the future, you're talking about the future. Who knows? But whilst we say, oh, these guys are arguing with those guys, something may happen left of field, which none of us is expecting, which is going to make this look like a walk in the park, these issues. So let's work together, those of us who know and trust one another already, to form these partnerships, because it's not about us, it's about, and not only making money, the client, the end client, the poor person being moved from A to B with a family. That's basically it.